Hello, everybody. Hope you're hanging in there. It's been a long day and long drive for some of you, and just really happy to be with all of you and to see so many young people here. The theme "Live On," as Maeve shared with me, is taken from John's Gospel, where Jesus says, in I guess one translation, "Live on in me," or another, "Abide in me," and that's from what's known as the last discourses of Jesus at the Last Supper before he entered into his passion and death. And there's so much beauty in those passages. But when I was reflecting on how to speak from this perspective, this theme this year, something popped into my head that I thought was really pertinent, because we know as pro-life people that our unborn brothers and sisters exist, and if they are killed before birth or die before birth, that they exist still. And so what came to mind is an experience that I had in my young adult years, where I had wanted to understand more deeply the impact of abortion on people. And through the work of some great pioneer doctors in the field, Dr. Philip Ney and Dr. Marie Peters-Ney, I attended a week-long training session called Hope Alive, and it was primarily oriented towards those who had experienced abortion or miscarriage. And so part of the week was to really welcome the child that is lost, because they've come to see that we don't have a real acknowledgement often of a child that's lost before birth, even for miscarriage sometimes. Now, I had when I was 12, my mother miscarried my brother John, and so for me, I am not post-abortive, but my pregnancy loss was my brother John, and my mom was only in her first trimester. There was no evidence that this was a boy, but she had her woman's intuition, mother intuition, that this was a boy, and she named him John, and he'd always been a part of our life. But that experience with the doctors in that training session led me to realize that there's so much to be discovered, even if that life is not even known to be male or female. So there was this process to welcome the child that we had lost. And so through this process of visualizing the child, really welcoming him, as though he was coming to the door to ask to be let in, I had this very clear and sudden picture of my brother John, and actually at the age he would have been had he survived. And I have 4 biological brothers. They're all different heights, and they're different eye color, different hair colors, a lot of mixed genes. But here was John, and he, with his curly hair, his larger build, his fun personality, just all very clear to me. Then after this training program, I went back home and I shared with my mother what I had experienced, and the tears started to roll down her face, and she said I had about 20 adjectives to describe him, and she said everything that I said about him is exactly how she'd always held him in her heart to be. And so I just think that it's a beautiful thing, by the grace of God, working through these doctors, and they're Christian and Catholic doctors, through my mother and her love for that unborn child, that we have come to and can come to see and share with others and share with the world, that each child conceived, even if it's never known, never met that child, never seen the face, never known whether it's a boy or a girl, lives on. So I was asked to share my testimony, and there's a lot to share. It's really been, for my life, one of grace upon grace. Unlike some of the other speakers today, I've always been pro-life. I was raised by pro-life parents who were aghast when the Canadian law changed and protection in law no longer existed for our unborn brothers and sisters. My mother was a full-time mom with us, raising a lot of kids. I'm one of 12 with 5 adopted, and I'm the third, so a lot of kids after me. But we'd always make it to Mass on Sunday, and that was always held as really important because Jesus was there, and it was the commandment to keep holy the Sabbath. The Eucharist became more and more important to me as I got a little bit older, and Mother Teresa had become a real light to me, and she would say, that how can we see Jesus in the poor, or to the degree that we see Jesus in the Eucharist, hidden in that little host, we can see him also in the distressing disguise of the poor. And I think how true that is, especially towards our unborn brothers and sisters, whom we can't see, especially in their early stages of their life. They're not visibly recognizable even as human beings. So from my childhood, I was raised to be pro-life. I went to public schools after an attempt with homeschooling very young, and Catholic schools. Public schools raised me in my education, and had to choose whether I was going to be silent or speak up. And I realized that if you start speaking up, it gets easier and easier. But if you're silent, it gets harder and harder to speak up. So better to start when you're young, even if it's as a teenager here today. Just like Dr. Buchalski was saying, just one little step that he leads you on in grace, and he will build on that. So I finished high school, went to University of Victoria. My roommate, who was providentially put in the same room with me, and I kind of resurrected the pro-life group. I remember thinking one day as we were spending our weekly meeting in the Student Union building, it just hit me. Well, there's mass killing going on. Am I doing enough what am I doing? And I think I was still looking very much from the secular perspective, but I had received this grace of my faith. And he led me after my graduation through a time of pilgrimage. I went to Europe, and I discovered through living and working with disabilities the presence of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament in a deeper way than I had always believed in my head, but through encounter with people with disabilities. I had a month at L'Arche, and it was always busy, always lively in the home. And then we were led to go to the chapel one day for prayer, and Jesus was exposed there in the little oratory, and everyone was silent. And I thought, it's really true. He really is there. And somehow these people with disabilities see it, perceive it more deeply than I ever have. So that journey of meeting him and discovering what a great treasure we have, and knowing that that's where a special place where we can meet him, where we can discern his calling for us. So I came back to Canada after many other experiences as well. I was a volunteer at Lourdes, and some young people from Poland invited me back to Poland with them. And I thought, that'd be great fun, sure. And they said, no, we need to take you somewhere. So, and they said, we need to take you to Auschwitz. You need to see what happened there. And I've always been reluctant to go where it's going to be uncomfortable for me. And I didn't really want to go, but they insisted on taking me. They're very persistent. So I agreed to go, and if anyone has gone, you can't avoid being affected deeply by what you see. One of the last things that I saw was the guest book, and it was people who had written over and over again, "May this never happen again." And what registered with me is that this terrible inhumanity, to classify a group of people as less than human, as something that you can treat as the enemy or as garbage or to be experimented upon. We have chosen to do something very similar to our unborn brothers and sisters in classifying them and dehumanizing them and killing them. So that stayed with me. I came back to Canada, and I just knew God had given me this grace during my time of pilgrimage, which was a solitary one, really, in material poverty as well, which was a grace. As we were hearing earlier today, I think I started with Father Connor this morning about how the views of the world are opposite to the gospel. And so it's true even in our vocabulary, where the world can see poverty, material poverty, as a great, as a disadvantage. Well, not speaking of indigence, but simplicity, really going without. It helps us to discover how much we rely on him. So that was part of my journey as well. Coming back to Canada, my grandmother we went to a Marian conference together. My grandmother gave me two images that I was really unfamiliar with. One was Our Lady of Guadalupe, and the other one was the Divine Mercy image, and she taught me the prayer of Divine Mercy. So for some reason, though, they just really, my heart really took to them. And I discovered, of course, the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which if you're not familiar with, that's really a discovery I encourage you to make. But she has appeared and she continues as Dr. John had shared with us in his story. She's still with us today. I really believe we should take her as our mother in our journey to try to advocate for our youngest brothers and sisters. So I came back and I said to God, because He'd led me to a place where I wanted Him to lead me. And all my life up until that point, I had asked Him to go along with my plans. And so my story of conversion, even though being raised in a Catholic home, no one is ever converted, period. It's ongoing. And I asked Him to lead me, and there was an opportunity to work in a maternity home. So I had some experience there with moms as young as 14, pregnant and planning to raise their children. And while I was there, even though it was greatly challenging, I asked God, I was working in the garden one day, God, if you're happy with this, I will continue. But if there's anything else that you want me to do, then just show me. Very soon after that, a friend of mine shared with me his experience at work. He was doing some research that summer, and he said, I'm bothered by what happened today. And I said, well, what happened today? And he said, well, we are doing some work, some research, and we were given specimens of babies' heads to use. And I said, well, that's really alarming. Do you know where these babies' heads came from? And he said, I don't know. They were really small. And so I said, it sounds like they were aborted babies, and you've got to find out where they came from. And he said, I don't want to rock the boat. I'm just there for the summer. I just want to get the work done, leave on good terms and with my supervisor and move on. And it really hurt my heart because he was a good friend and he was Catholic, and I just assumed that he would want to know, regardless of how that might affect him. So I took it to prayer, and I went before the image of Jesus, the Divine Mercy image, and I asked God to help him discover the truth. And God gave me a tremendous grace, which was in the form of a very broken heart at that moment, talking Dr. Jean about the increase of suffering and how that can be good. I had not asked to suffer in that way, but what he did was he allowed me to see the baby in the womb being aborted in probably a suction abortion. I'd never ever seen a video of that before. I didn't think I needed to see even pictures of the victims of abortion to be any more convicted of my pro-life stand. But when I saw that, I cannot say except it was heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, and I grieved as though it were my own child. And I had to go to a friend's, and I had to just begin to process the reality of what I experienced, but what was actually going on, what that child, what our littlest brothers and sisters are experiencing. And through that encounter with His grace, abortion was no longer an issue for me. It was not a problem somehow that had to be solved. It was not a distant, abstract concept. What became so abundantly clear is that it's about one child at a time, one mother at a time, who was being killed, the child, and harmed the mother. And it became very clear to me this is happening in my own city. Where it's happening, when it's happening in the local hospital. And I felt this urgency to go where, well, first of all, the first step was to go to confession, and I had a good confession. And then I was counseled to seek some spiritual direction by my mother, who thought that I just can't go rushing off that way. God gives us a grace sometimes, but He also gives us time. So I couldn't just up and leave the mothers that I had become responsible for. So we waited, and eventually somebody came to fill my shoes. And I did speak with a priest that I was recommended would be a good one to speak to. And he listened to me, he listened to what I shared with him. He advised me to ask Saint Therese to help me. And he said, so just do that. And so I left him. This was then in Vancouver at that point. He was working from the Vancouver Cathedral. And I went into the cathedral just simply obeying him and giving to God what I had shared with this priest. And I said, God, you know, I give it to you. If you want me to live this out, to go to where your children are being killed, are imminently in danger, then you show me. So I gave that simple prayer, walked out of the cathedral, and there at on the steps of the cathedral was a girl. She looked about 12. Through conversations with her, I learned she was a teenager, she was about 16. And she had come from Ontario with her boyfriend, and they were begging on the streets. She was at the corner, he was across the street. Through our conversation, she told me that she was pregnant and abortion-minded because that was what her boyfriend figured they should do. She didn't have health insurance for BC, so she couldn't go through with it right away, thanks be to God. But she had everyone who was close to her, and there weren't many, her mother in Ontario and her boyfriend, telling her to have the abortion. And really myself offering her an alternative. The alternative, my parents thankfully said, because I was living at home then at that point, tell her whatever it takes if she wants to come and live with us. And I was raised that way, so for me it's not a big deal. Okay, you're pregnant, you need a place to stay. Of course, then you come. So my parents were willing to welcome her in and her child, but her boyfriend was not willing to let that happen. So days went by, weeks went by, and then I would see her. I would go to Mass to see her. I'd managed to get her to the coffee shop once, but her boyfriend was really dominating, and that was the end of it for her. Was the night before she did share with me, I'm going to have the abortion tomorrow. And her mother, who was post-abortive, rather than having healed, she sort of doubled down in her conviction that it was the right thing and told her, you've got to do this, don't chicken out. So this poor young woman had everything against her. And what the priest had said to me, because I had shared with him about this young woman and asked him, he said, just accompany her, stay with her. And that seemed obvious to me. So all of that time, offering support, praying for her. But the time came when she was going to go ahead with it. So that morning, I met her outside and again asked her, could you please reconsider? And the boyfriend just took her by the shoulder. We're going in, we're doing this. And so I walked in with them. And for me, it was a no-brainer because I had a commitment to her, a relationship with her. It was clear, why would I not do that? As long as there's life, there's still hope. So I walked in with them. I thought we were the only ones there because there was one waiting room and the receptionist. The receptionist said to her, we can't go ahead until we have your ultrasound images from St. Paul's Hospital, the Catholic hospital in the city, which was alarming to me. We were then told to wait in another waiting room, and there were other women there. I sat there hoping, praying that somehow God would intervene, and then a young woman got up when a nurse came into the room and called her. So I stood up and went to speak with her and said, you don't have to do this. And then because of my dialogue with her, it got the attention of the staff, and I was asked what I was doing there, why are you there? Eventually told just to leave, but I remained there. That was the only thing I knew that I should do, was to stay. And so eventually that led to the police coming and me being taken out. My friend, before they did that, I had been surrounded by 5 staff members. I was standing in the hallway, but I think that because I was present so close to the killing room, that I was preventing them from going on. And so they felt they had to call the police and take me out. And I was put in the police wagon along with my friend who I asked to come and pray, just pray with me outside and stay out there. They had arrested her illegally, and the 2 of us were taken to jail. I went back I was only there for a couple hours. They didn't charge us. I went back to the cathedral for 2 weeks, and I did not see my young friend there. And then I finally saw her, and she looked very sick, and her baby would have been about 16 weeks at the time of the abortion. And she said to me, "The baby's gone, and I don't want to see you." And that was my last conversation with her. And so I saw her twice after that, and the last time she had been in the cathedral with a homeless person and showing him the Stations of the Cross. And I think God gave that little sign that even though sometimes our efforts seem to fail, and we heard that today earlier, we will fail. It's not, first of all, it's not our own efforts that are what we need to judge success or failure on. It's by faithfulness. And so I understood that God had given me the grace to love that young girl, to be with her, to try to advocate for her and her baby. And ultimately, it was out of my hands. What was clear to me from that was that inside that killing place, there was the absence of love. And I mentioned Mother Teresa earlier. She has been a real light for me in so many ways. And she has shared that her calling, she said, is what I'm asked to do, what God calls me to do, is not what God calls you to do, but together, work together. And what he put on my heart is that we can love the mothers in crisis, and we need to be doing that. And the crisis pregnancy centers that exist, more of them need to exist. We need 40 Days for Life. More such prayerful efforts need to exist. But at no point should anyone be abandoned, ultimately. And there's no greater abandonment than when a mother and child walk into a killing place. And instead of having somebody advocate for them, everyone there is working to end that life, to take that life, to kill that child. So I had made that discernment that God was inviting me to go to the killing places, and always to go there with others to pray. Because again, we can't, without, as Jesus says in this same gospel passage, He is the vine and we are the branches, and without Him we can do nothing. We are the body of Christ. We need each other. From the oldest among us to the youngest among us, we need each other. And I knew that I needed somebody there to pray. So God gave me the grace then to go and to see as a place where He is abandoned, where He needs to be loved inside these killing places. So some people have asked me or wondered about, well, is it necessary to break the law? And I don't want to look at it in terms of breaking the law or not breaking the law. First of all, we have some really good wisdom from St. Thomas Aquinas, who said that action that is asking us to break a law that is unjust. I'm totally paraphrasing it, but an unjust law is not a law. It's not binding. It's in fact an act of violence. So if we should be aware of that as our country changes and brings in laws or takes laws out, that it's not the final determination of what is right and just. Not to say we can do whatever we want, but a lot of discernment is really needed. But that's what became clear to me. And so I'm very grateful to be able to also talk a little bit about how God has led others. Before me, there was, and many, maybe some here have parents or grandparents who were involved in Operation Rescue. Maybe if you can show of hands, if anyone had parents or grandparents, or maybe aunts or uncles, or somebody that they knew who was involved in the early 1980s, 1990s Operation Rescue here in Canada. If you raise your hand really high, because I don't see any hands. One hand, okay. Okay, so I like to share that with you because it's a part of our pro-life history. It started in the United States, where early on, when abortion became legalized there, around the same time as in Canada, there were Christians, not just Catholics, but other Christians and people who were not people of faith, who simply saw, okay, the law has changed now. It doesn't mean that it's okay to kill. It's wrong. And how would we respond before the law if somebody was going to kill a child, an unborn child, how would we respond? Well, we would do everything we could to go close to that mother to offer her support, right? So people saw that what was necessary was some kind of action directly where the killing is going on. So for many years, I'm guessing maybe 10, maybe more, there was this movement called Operation Rescue. And there were thousands of people committed to nonviolent civil disobedience. There were also some fringe people who thought violence was the route to go. But I'm talking about something very specific. It was a loving, merciful action that resulted in closing the killing places, that resulted in a sort of ecumenical work among Christians coming together, praying and loving those who were abandoned. And now what happened in this was a growing movement. If you can believe it, there were more people arrested for this nonviolent direct action than in the history of the civil rights movement in the US. And it was reaching a point where I guess the government felt threatened enough that they brought in some really draconian laws to prosecute them. So people were looking at getting life sentences, having their children taken from them, simply for going and sitting in front and blocking access to an abortion center. So that killed the movement in the States. And in Canada, it had just started to be a movement when it kind of fell by the wayside as well. But I think it's important has anyone heard of this? Maybe raise your hand if you've heard of the early movement, the rescue movement. A couple of hands. Yeah, okay, so it's really important to realize their logic was, if the unborn child is a human being, they deserve our sacrificial love. And there were mothers and fathers and priests and even bishops who were arrested at this time, and some of them spent long periods of time in jail. In recent years in the United States, there's been a movement similar, and the approach that I've taken and some others to go into the killing place has kind of grown in the US a little bit as well, where in our hearts and minds is the imminent need to love the mother and child in danger at the killing places. So, and to remain there, to offer support, to offer love, usually through a rose, with a card, with some practical assistance. Here's where you can go if you need help, if you're pregnant and need help. Just a loving gesture to offer help, to offer support, but with that commitment to the mothers, that you're not going to walk away. And if a mother says, yes, I'll get help, you walk out with her if she wants that help. So it's not done for the purpose of breaking the law or trying to make a point. It's really to love those most abandoned. So in the States, there's been a little movement with mostly lay people, but there's also been a Franciscan friar, the Renewal Father Fidelis Moshinsky, who's currently in custody for their very similar efforts. And they've called it the Red Rose Rescues. So there's not really any organization officially, and that's deliberate also, just the idea that I've shared with you today, to reach out to moms in crisis in this way. So today, just because I think it's important to see pictures, just like we show pictures of the babies who are killed and as victims, that we also can see our friends in custody. Now I'll share, if you can put the images on, please. Thank you. The first picture here is Joan Andrews Bell. And Joan Bell, she was really at the heart of the rescue movement. She's in custody. There are 8 people in custody for an act of nonviolent civil disobedience in the United States. Joan Bell is 75 or 76 years old. She spent years in custody in solitary confinement, one of the most merciful, loving people I've ever met. And first time I met her, she was speaking at a Human Life International conference years ago in Toronto. And I walked in as she was giving a speech, and she was just expressing in her really candid, beautiful way, we love them, we absolutely love them. And it was in response to a question somebody had about How do we as pro-life people approach those involved directly? How do we approach the abortionist or those who are assisting? And she was so emphatic and so genuine. We love them and we pray for them. Joan was asked to be the sponsor of Dr. Bernard Nathanson. Has anyone heard of him? Okay, got some hands there. Not very many. He was one of the doctors foremost in bringing abortion, legalizing abortion in the United States. He was not a person of faith, which should be obvious at the time. He admitted, he's passed away now, but he admitted that they publicly lied to manipulate public opinion about the number of women who died by illegal abortions. He said, we made up those statistics. We just knew that we had to get the sympathy, get to the heart of people to help overturn the law. So he was, while he was, I believe, still involved in abortions, Joan and others did rescues. And he credits the rescuers, their nonviolence, their love with his conversion. And he asked Joan to be his sponsor when he was received into the Catholic Church. Joan hasn't changed. Her desire to love not just our unborn brothers and sisters, but just to love each one that she meets as Christ. And I would like to share that just because I don't think abortion is an issue. It's a scourge that stems from our straying from God and from His will. And I think that we all realize that. But as Mother Teresa said, Jesus is one person at a time, that there's no ideal except Christ. And so I hold on to that, and I hope that you would as well. That so where Joan might meet somebody on the street, and that's Christ for them, and just have that same love and that openness. So that's Joan Bell, and then we'll just go through all of the people that you'll see are in custody right now. They've been in custody since October, when they were found guilty of breaking the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrance Act, which is legislation that was brought in that killed the rescue movement back in the 90s, I think, and it can carry a life sentence. It can carry up to 11 years in custody. Some of them have lawyers. Joan has chosen to be vulnerable and not have a lawyer, just speak and to be identifying more with our unborn brothers and sisters who have no advocates. She might get the heaviest sentence. She's 75, 76 years old. She's a mother, she's a grandmother. And the others have been warned by their lawyers that they might get 4 years in custody. So I ask you, they're going to be sentenced this week, May 5th, this coming week, 15th to 17th. So if you can pray for them. But you'll see each of their images, ranging in age from 20-something all the way up to 70s. So just so you have an idea, thank you. Joan Andrews Bell, Herb Garati, 25, Lauren Handy, 30 years old, John Hinshaw, 69, he's married and has a family, Paulette Harlow, 75, she's on house arrest, Jean Marshall, 72 years old, Will Goodman, very good friend of mine, 54 years old, Heather Idoni, 59 years old, and Jonathan Darnell, 42 years old. Thank you. I know that if Joan were here, she would just be loving every single one of you. She is, like I say, just such a beautiful person. People will sometimes ask me, well, what? Like you got arrested, then you're in jail, then you can't do the work, you can't be there for the moms and the babies. And in fact, especially being in a women's prison, in fact, there are pregnant women in jail, and many times my friend Linda Gibbons and I have been able to meet women in that situation. I mean, you hear about hard cases where you think, oh, what about in this case? Hard cases are definitely in jail where people's lives are upside down, they've lost their support, and yet there's this little child growing in them. And that happened many times. And my friend Linda Gibbons, she's in Toronto, and she has spent many years in custody just for walking up and down the sidewalk with a sign and a drawing of a baby that says, "Why, Mom, when I have so much love to give?" She has helped about 12 babies be born by meeting moms in prison. And I've also met some in prison whose babies are alive today. I think, I'm not sure how we are doing for time. 2:00. Yeah. So I'm wondering if maybe people have questions, because I can wrap things up here at this point.
Hi, Mary.
Hello.
I'll just talk loudly. I think so many of us love coming to March for Life and events because we get to see so many other people who care about these issues, and we understand because of testimonies like yours and the one from Dr. Bird why we're so passionate, why they're so important. But then so many of us go home, and I feel like a lot of that passion is often wasted because people don't know what's a practical first step to take when they begin to understand why this issue is so important. What would you say are some really practical first steps that you like us can take when we go home, when we have this passion, we have this drive? Where should we put that?
Okay, so I'll just repeat the question in case it wasn't that clear. I mean, you spoke clearly, but maybe, did you hear it at the back? Do you want me to repeat the question? Okay, so just in a nutshell, the question is, we can come to the March for Life and receive so much and be, really excited, but then we can go back home and, it's not very clear anymore how we can proceed, how we can live out what we've received. And I think really it comes down to if you don't have a prayer life, if you don't have a sense of God in your life, first of all, ask Him to come into your life. Ask Him to show you. I think most of us do here, otherwise we probably wouldn't be here, but there might be somebody who doesn't. Because He will show you. If you genuinely say, Lord, here I am, I come to do your will, He will lead you. But ask that question. Ask Him to show you. Ask Him to give you strength. And be ready to be led in a direction that you might think, oh, how is that going to be effective? That's that concern for being effective is like a quasi-concern. We have to see that God is infinitely, His plan is infinitely greater than ours. So we might think, oh, I must do this because I'm going to be the most effective at that. But actually, if we just say, God, well, maybe you have thoughts on this, and He might just say, yeah, very good, follow. But His plan is greater than. He wants to end abortion more than all of us put together, more than the most passionate, dedicated pro-life person. So if he wants that even more, He's also going to know how that's going to work out. And He might lead us to some surprising places. He's led me the last few years to become like a mom to two little girls. And I never would have thought that I would go in that direction. And yet I've always believed that motherhood is at the heart of the pro-life movement, or that sacred mother-child bond. There's nothing greater than that bond for forming up a life and bringing a life into the world and into this culture. So just really be open, but don't lose that sense that He is calling me to something. Just don't let it fall by the wayside. Pray. Just keep praying and asking.
Hi, Mary. Thank you
Sarah.
so much for being here. My question regards being in prison, and you mentioned how you've met pregnant mothers in prison, and I was wondering if abortion is something that is offered to pregnant mothers in prison, and how, if you have experience with that, how you've gone about helping them, because obviously it's not a good place to be in. And some women may think, well, how can I raise a child and I'm in prison, and say, I don't know if they have a sentence of 10 years, what is their child's life going to be like if they give birth? Yeah. And so I was wondering what your experience is on that.
Yeah, thanks for asking the question. So I can only speak to my experience at the Vanier Women's Detention Center in Milton, Ontario, where I had an encounter with the doctor, because everyone has to see the doctor when they come in, and she was very abortion-minded, and that was what she would suggest or just assume that would be the best thing for women. So they were up against a lot. They are up against a lot in the jail. I also know that there were some nurses working there who were pro-life who would do what they could. But to be there and in the midst of this dark place and say, we can help you, what do you need? I will never forget a visitor, and you don't usually know who's coming to visit, but I got a visitor one day from a woman who'd been in custody the year before, and she came in, she was pregnant again. She'd had 4 abortions before that, and Linda and I were together at that point, and in the jail, and we prayed and we fasted for her. We were with her for a week, and we got outside help, because we asked her, the first question when somebody's pregnant and in a crisis, what do you need? What support do you need? And then we have to be able to offer it. So she needed some help paying some fines. So somebody I know I'm close to paid her fines for her, and that made the difference for her, just taking a bit of a burden off. And then she came to see me the year later with her little boy, completely different person, with her 4-month-old baby boy bouncing on her knee. And just thanks be to God for that. So there, as I say, Linda she knows of 12 women who gave birth. The long term, because we're in the provincial jail pre-sentencing, or less than 2 years, wasn't something that we were, because once women are sentenced, they go to a different part of the jail if it's for long term. So I didn't actually have that encounter, but if there's somebody to offer that support, I think of the women worst case scenario, a woman who's been raped, right? Many people think, oh, that's automatic, you have an abortion, but if she's not already thinking of having the baby, if she can be counseled to see that this is a devastation that's happened to her, but this baby is a greater good, like the greatest good that can come out of something so evil, and be given the support that she's needed, no one is going to regret giving birth. It's rare that somebody comes to birth and says, I wish I hadn't. But even when that does happen, who's heard of Rebecca Kiesling? Okay, a few hands. I'll just, if I can, just share this one story. So she was conceived in rape in Chicago. Her mother did not know the attacker. It was just your classic horrible rape by a stranger, and she was abortion-minded, and 2 appointments she made were canceled. The second time was because of a snowstorm that shut down the city. And after the snowstorm, it was past the legal limit for abortion. And so she had the baby against her will. She was bitter and angry that she'd had the baby. Rebecca grew up adopted by a family, reached out to her birth mother, was rejected to her face. I mean, that's pretty much the worst case scenario. Rebecca had become a Christian, continued to pray for her birth mom, and eventually established a loving relationship with her, where they're very close now. So God does not write the final chapters on our lives, right? In a moment, the final chapters are going to carry on throughout our lifetime and beyond. So just always, where there's life, there's hope, and offering real support is what's needed. Yeah.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Of course, here our commitment to preborn children must be continuous in how we treat mothers, even abortion.
Sorry, I didn't quite. Just one more time, please.
So we agree on the principle of nonviolence and even loving people who commit acts of abortion violence. I wanted to ask about strategies in nonviolent civil disobedience, about methods of shutting down the violence in places. For example, when it comes to manufacturers of weapons, for example, related to abortion tools and other things, is there any precedent in the movement of doing such actions, or even sabotage of equipment? I know it can be distinguished and debated among people about differentiating between human life and respect of property, but if we know they are being manufactured to end human life and sold for profit. What would be the rule reasonably for pro-lifers when it comes to direct nonviolent civil disobedience if they think that this is a possibility?
Yeah, I don't know if we could speak to a rule per se. That's a good question. I appreciate that, and we want to be really clear that we are non, like the pro-life movement and gospel of life movement is nonviolent, and you made that clear in your question as well. But what popped into my mind is not really related to that question in particular, but just the awareness that so much goes into killing our unborn brothers and sisters. And I remember one time praying outside of the killing place, and that was just being built. I remember talking with the men who were bringing in the appliances and saying, you have a choice here. You don't have to go along with that. So just even by starting with the awareness that we are given a choice to facilitate abortion and other social evils, or we're given the choice to refuse to that at personal cost.
Pro-lifers to get together and maybe sit in on the construction site. You might have heard in other movements where people chain themselves to equipment or trees. It's a bit extreme. Not everybody wants to or has the ability to do that. I know but just like kind of that would be the direction I could see as a.
It's always
way.
a discernment. For me, what's paramount is the human being in imminent danger. And so when we and I'm not saying that I don't accept or don't agree with, but when we start looking at the issue of abortion, and that it's a different matter, it's a different perspective. So I'm not the best person to speak to on that, but I think as long as our actions are loving, peaceful, nonviolent, and really to understand what that means is really important as well. We should support creative initiatives. Yeah, thank you.